Chair recognizes Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to join my colleagues in mourning the 67 people who were killed in the tragic aircraft collision last night near Reagan National Airport. Among the victims, as reported in the news, is a woman from my state, from Matamidi, Minnesota, a wonderful town. It will be very hard to talk to her family. Figure skaters we lost from the U.S. team and Russia, who will never get to compete in the World Championship. Families flying from Wichita to Washington, D.C., who will never get to see our nation's capital. And 3 American soldiers whose moms and dads will get the call that every parent dreads when their son or daughter signs up to serve our country. This was a horrific tragedy. While there is still so much more that we need to know about this crash, and we know we must get to the bottom of what happened. My thoughts are with the victims' families and loved ones and the first responders leading the recovery operation last night, and then, of course, the operation today in the icy waters of the Potomac. Turning to another topic completely different is what is going on right now in the halls of Congress and over at the new administration. I also join my colleagues in expressing serious concern about the chaos that we've seen in just the first week of this new administration. Earlier this week, the administration issued an order to cut off support that families across the country rely on, including funding for first responders. It was actually a 2-page memorandum from a guy named Mr. Vaith in the Office of Management and Budget. I had never heard of him, but he issued this 2-page memorandum that made the intent very, very clear. He cut off loans and grants, announced that this was, in fact, the position of the administration and that they were going to freeze or pause, in their words, loans and grants for everything from funding for childcare, for health centers and medical research, for the heating assistance that millions of people rely on in my state, especially in these cold, cold days. This order, made with a stroke of a pen by a single unelected bureaucrat, opened the door to stalled projects, economic uncertainty, and confusion across the country. And yesterday, the administration, Mr. Vaith himself actually put in a 1 or 2 sentence memorandum that rescinded the one he had made just the day before. So that was a moment to say, okay, we are looking forward to working with our Republican colleagues and with the administration to make government more efficient and look at reforms to way things are done. Okay, that's great, let's do it together. But that wasn't over, because then the administration created more confusion by putting out a series of contradictory statements and a social media post from the press secretary in the White House that in fact that wasn't true, that in fact the funds were still frozen. So we are still getting calls throughout the day trying to figure out. We've heard reports of some portals that have been shut down. I've heard that from other senators as well, and then some that have been opened up, and some that, of course, are opened up because of the temporary court stay that was put in place. This chaos, here's the point, does nothing to actually bring down the cost of housing, child care, health care, energy bills, but it reminds us that it is our job, for those of us who took an oath of office just about a month ago, it is our job to protect and defend the Constitution, because honestly, this was a defiance of the Constitution. Congress is set up in Article 1. It is our job to make these decisions, and these were funds that were voted on, passed on by Democrats and Republicans working together when we got the last budget done, and then we got it extended. So this isn't a game. What Americans are feeling is real. A number of them voted for change. They wanted to see something new, but for them that meant actually new things that helped them with costs. I think about the mom who was unsure if she could get her child into childcare yesterday when she saw the news. I think about the teenager in a cancer study when those funds were frozen. I think about the woman in an abusive relationship who has nowhere to go because her local domestic violence shelter was cut off of funding. My office heard yesterday from a domestic violence organization that couldn't access their funding. I think about the firefighters who rely on grants to hire and retain firefighters, as well as grants for equipment. I think about the 30,000 plus American veterans. I think about how our leading organization fighting veterans homelessness gets half of its funding through federal grants. I think about the construction workers who are worried they could lose their jobs if they're working on infrastructure projects right now, projects where the money has been not only voted on and signed into law, but also the money is actually out and they're working on the projects, but then they don't know, and the questions we got is, so are these funds frozen too? I think about the seniors who rely on Meals on Wheels. We've heard from volunteers with that program who are worried, what should we do? Should we keep serving the seniors? Are they going to have meals? What should we tell them when we go to the door when they ask us? I think about the small business owners who get the support through SBA loans. And I think about the rural families who count on electric co-ops. We have one of the highest percentage in my state of smaller co-ops to keep the lights on. At a time when rural families are already dealing with uncertainty of proposed tariffs and how's that going to affect them, particularly in farming communities, workforce issues, input costs, and more, the last thing they need right now is more chaos and confusion. As I said, Article 1 of the Constitution makes clear that it is Congress's job to direct funding through laws passed by both chambers. That system of checks and balances, and I mentioned this at the inauguration. Why do we have the president's inauguration not in the White House or a gilded executive office building? We have it at the Capitol. Why do we do that? Because it is very clear. This is a country, founding fathers set up a system of checks and balances, 3 equal branches of government. That's the foundation of our democracy. Fortunately, actually, there was pushback from this chamber. There was pushback from our side of the aisle, at least. And there was pushback when they looked at the law. 2 federal courts have said, no, that's not how this works. But despite all that, the administration, everyone, I believe, in this chamber is ready to work with them on some new ideas for reform. But that was not how this was handled. This was handled by a faceless bureaucrat, Mr. Faith, who I've never met. I look forward to meeting him one day, who was able, with a stroke of a pen, to kind of call all grants and loans for all these people and businesses just to a halt, just like that. The result was more confusion, more commotion, and more chaos. But maybe the chaos is the point. This is a moment where I was hopeful we could find common ground on some issues, and of course I knew we'd stand our ground on some. That's how this place works. But we're not going to find common ground if we're in the middle of chaos, because then everyone rushes to defend the people in their state, which they have to do because their constituents are like, what is this? Instead of with the 3 chambers that we have here, with the executive branch, with the House and the Senate, that we try to work these things out. And in fact, given that Republicans run all 3 branches right now, at least they should be able to work it out in a way that's legal. Instead, what do we hear about? Tax breaks for billionaires, expense of everyone else, dismantling the healthcare system. This is a big deal. As maybe the former president said in his words, a big deal. We've got to get this right if we're going to do this, if we're going to make change. And the way this happened, what happened here, was wrong. And I'm glad there was pushback. We're going to continue to lead that fight. But I hope our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle next time will join us. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.